Greetings all, Ferrari Man 601 here. Welcome back to iRacing. Welcome aboard the Mercedes W12. We're not talking about either particularly today. What I would just like for all of you to do is to join me on a Sunday afternoon drive. You may have noticed that we are at the Red Bull Ring today. And of course we are in the new Mercedes W12. First of all, I regret to inform you, however I must inform you, as I get my pedals calibrated properly here. I must inform you that I did make a review of this car, however it is currently being held up in yet another bogus copyright dispute. I don't know how Formula One management can claim the sound of my own voice, but they do it, and they have done it again. So therefore, you have not gotten the content that I wanted to give you this weekend. However, other things happened this weekend, namely the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, the finale of the 2021 Formula One World Championship. Two men for the title, absolutely dead even on points going into the weekend. Max Verstappen qualified on pole position. Lewis Hamilton alongside him. All the makings for a great season finale. Two men for the title, they are nose to tail on the grid. Undoubtedly the two best talents on the grid today. Whoever finished ahead of the other was going to be world champion. Simple as that. None of these weird points permutations going on. Just straight up racing. And it was all set up to be an absolutely great end to a season that's definitely going to be one for the record books. Longest season. Wouldn't have expected it to go as far as it did. Usually, as far as Formula One goes, particularly when we've had very dominant periods, and Mercedes has been absolutely untouchable since 2014 and the beginning of this overall generation of regs. They've been winning world championships every year. Their drivers have been winning the championship every year. Lewis Hamilton winning 6 of them on the trot. Nico Rosberg taking one in 2016. But Mercedes taking the Constructors' Championship 8 times in a row. No one else has ever done that. That's pretty remarkable. So we had that context going into Abu Dhabi. Had no reason to suspect that we would see anything other than a world-class ending to what is a world-class story. However, we had exactly the opposite of a world-class ending to the 2021 season. And fortunately, for both Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, had nothing to do with either man. Unfortunately for Formula One on the whole, had everything to do with the officiating at this race, which quite honestly was just indicative of the overall standard of officiation that we have seen through the entirety of this season. We've had inconsistencies from the stewards this whole time. In fact, I don't really recall a situation this year, an overall period this year, when we weren't talking about a questionable call from the clerk of the course. And unfortunately, such a situation occurred once again today. It all started right from the word go. Max Verstappen was on pole, of course. However, when the lights went out, Lewis Hamilton got a much better purchase from his rear axle, and he turned his P2 starting grid slot into P1 by turn 1. And there he remained until the field reached turn 6 on lap 1. Max Verstappen consolidated his position, P2 on track, stayed within the slipstream distance of Lewis Hamilton, made a lunge into turn 6 up the inside. Hamilton honestly was not guarding the apex perhaps as he should have done. And Verstappen shot one up the inside, made the apex. Hamilton either didn't see Verstappen or was so surprised that he actually committed to the move that when Hamilton went to turn into the corner, he was surprised to see Max there alongside him. And Hamilton quickly turned the steering back to the right, cut across an escape road, cutting the corner, but maintaining his advantage. Lewis Hamilton would maintain that advantage for the vast duration of the race today. Questionable call for sure not to make Lewis concede the position, as Verstappen was demonstrably ahead of Hamilton by the apex of the corner. Therefore, one would suspect that that would be Lewis's position to concede. However, it didn't happen. Lewis was not made to do it, and therefore, being a racing driver, he wasn't going to do it. Fair play. But then, about 5 laps to go, we had Nicholas Latifi crash. Relatively minor incident. Just lost it all by himself. Nosed it into the turn 16 barriers. Car spun around, took the back end out as well. Day done. Latifi jumps out. No ill effects with him, thankfully. A little bit of a brake fire on the Williams. Marshals have to be deployed to take care of that, and of course to remove the car because it's not rolling away. That brings out the safety car. As Formula One has gone since 2007, I believe, when they instituted this rule of lapped cars may be allowed to overtake the safety car queue and rejoin at the end of the longest line, much like is often done in NASCAR. That was thought to be the case of what was going to happen with this safety car period. However, as the safety car picked up the race leader, who at this point was Lewis Hamilton, on a set of hard tires that was many decades of laps old by this point, I believe something around 44 laps, it soon became clear that race control was not going to allow lapped cars to overtake the safety car queue and rejoin the end of the longest line. Now, race control are at their discretion to allow or not to allow that to happen. It's in the regulations. However, there were 5 lapped cars between Lewis Hamilton in first place and Max Verstappen in second place. This would mean that despite being on a fresh set of soft tires, Max Verstappen would have to overtake 5 cars before he would even be able to see Lewis Hamilton. And by the way, we're coming down to 2 laps to go before the end of the race, safety car or not. So there's some back and forth between the pit walls of Mercedes and Red Bull and Michael Massey, the FIA race director. Red Bull, of course, is saying, how come you're not letting these lap cars go? You're absolutely destroying our chance to fight Hamilton. And Mercedes likewise saying, yeah, let them stay there. We don't care. And it appeared going into the last lap that the safety car would come in and that there would be 5 lapped cars between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen on track, thus effectively sealing the deal for Lewis Hamilton to win his 8th Drivers' Championship, something that nobody has ever done. However, with about half a lap to go before the safety car would be called back into the pits and the green flags would fly for one final lap of racing in the 2021 season, race control came out once again with a statement. They reneged on their prior declaration that lap cars would not be allowed to overtake the safety car, and then ordered those 5 lapped cars, and only those 5 lapped cars, to overtake the safety car and rejoin the end of the longest line. This move then, of course, put Lewis Hamilton directly in front of Max Verstappen on track. And Verstappen, who had made a pit stop for soft tires when the safety car was first called out, Lewis Hamilton elected to stay out, assuming that the field was neutralized and that those lapped cars would remain where they were. Hamilton now was at an extreme disadvantage with his tire life and his tire specification. The softs are always going to be faster than the hards, no matter what condition they're in. But particularly in the state that Hamilton's tires were, there was no way that he was going to be able to mount a challenge to Max Verstappen. The safety car returned to the pits, the green flags went up, and the race was restarted for the final lap of the 2021 season. Lewis Hamilton put up a fight, of course. He maintained his lead into turn 1, but going in to turn 3 or turn 4, depending on what you consider a turn, there was no use in defending anymore. The tires simply didn't have it. Max Verstappen was able to sail one up the inside of Lewis Hamilton and take the all-important P1. No matter where Max finished in the points relative to Lewis Hamilton, as long as he scored more points than the Englishman, he would be world champion. The fact that the difference between them was P1 and P2 was just icing on the cake. Max Verstappen's lead became unassailable very quickly. There was some weaving down the infield straights between Verstappen and Hamilton. Verstappen obviously trying to defend his newly found P1 with anything that he had. And Hamilton was unable to attack Verstappen further. They did briefly come side by side, but Hamilton's tires were so rooted to the point where his brakes were ineffective relative to the Red Bulls. And Verstappen consolidated his lead through turn 9, and that sealed the deal on the Dutchman becoming the 2021 Formula One World Drivers' Champion. As consolation, Mercedes did clinch their 8th Constructors' Championship today, a testament to their unassailable dominance since 2014. But that was not the end of the story. Almost immediately after the checkered flag flew, acrimony quickly ensued between Mercedes, Red Bull, and the FIA. Max Verstappen had won the World Championship on track, unquestionably. Look at the results, look at the permutations required for a Verstappen championship. So long as Max finished ahead of Lewis Hamilton, no matter what happened today, he would be world champion. And that is exactly what ended up happening. However, going back to the start of the safety car period brought on by the crash of Nicholas Latifi, Lewis Hamilton was in the position that he required in order to become an 8-time world champion, and would have remained so without that safety car period occurring, and would have remained so without those lapped cars being allowed to unlap themselves, as they were initially directed by race control. In the hours that have followed the race, we've seen 2 protests on the part of Mercedes to the FIA against 2 things that occurred during the race. During that safety car period approaching the restart, Max Verstappen drew level with Lewis Hamilton into the stadium section underneath the hotel. And the front axle of the Red Bull was briefly ahead of the front axle of the Mercedes, heading underneath the hotel. Was this a breach of the regulations? That's what Mercedes asked the FIA. The stewards convened, they reviewed the video evidence, and they concluded that while Max Verstappen did momentarily pass Lewis Hamilton in that his nose was slightly ahead of Hamilton's, there was no advantage gained. Verstappen immediately retreated back behind the front axle of Lewis Hamilton, and that regardless, Verstappen was not out of position relative to Hamilton before the safety car line, meaning that when the green flags flew, the running order was exactly as it was intended. And a secondary question that has been brought on by Mercedes to the FIA concerns the lapped cars behind the safety car. Race control initially declared that no one would be allowed to lap the safety car and rejoin the end of the longest line. Mercedes seemed content with this. Red Bull did not seem content with this. However, when race control issues a ruling, that's that. You can appeal it later if you don't like it, but that's that. When the checkered flag flies, that's the final word. However, race control reneged on that ruling a lap and a half later. with just half a lap to go behind the safety car, and then told specifically the 5 cars between Hamilton and Verstappen to overtake the safety car and rejoin the end of the longest line, despite there being insufficient time for those lapped cars to do another lap, even at racing speed relative to safety car pace, and truly rejoin the end of the field before the green flags flew. Mercedes immediately got on the radio to race director Michael Massey and said, "What are you doing? This isn't right." Mercedes was right to do that. It's not often that race control contradicts its own ruling. Nor is it often that you get 2 teams on the radio to race control, trying to persuade them one way or another to make a ruling on something that ultimately is more concerned with driver safety and the overall flow of the race than it is concerned with anyone's particular championship aspirations. However, race control falling to pressure, either from Mercedes or from Red Bull, but pressure that was external to the operation of race control, questioned their judgment and ultimately reversed course. And that reversal of course is what determined the outcome of the 2021 Formula One World Drivers' Championship. The second appeal that was lodged by Mercedes was denied, just like the safety car protest was denied. And per the stewards, per the clerk of the course, per the FIA race director, Max Verstappen is, absolutely, without doubt, the 2021 World Drivers' Champion. Either man deserved it. Quite frankly, either team deserved the Constructors' Championship. The early part of the season, it could be argued that Mercedes perhaps were a little bit lacking relative to Red Bull. The pace was there, yes. The race wins were there, yes. But perhaps the all-out performance was slightly lacking. However, toward the middle and end of the year, undoubtedly, both Hamilton and Mercedes stepped it up. Their performances improved. Hamilton's consistency improved. The errors that befell him in events like Baku, for example, where a switch change sealed the deal on that occasion, those errors disappeared from the 7-time world champion. And Hamilton once again regained the form that we've always known him to have. Utterly unassailable, steely resolve, and utter perfection, both on and off track. Max Verstappen, on the other hand, had been resolute the entire year. Still somewhat error-prone, it may be argued. Still somewhat fiery, it may be argued. However, he's a much younger man than Lewis Hamilton. Despite having several years of Formula One experience already to his own credit, Hamilton still has more. And beyond that, Hamilton has been in every situation that possibly could occur on a racetrack before. Max Verstappen still has not. Experience versus youth, but at the end of the day, still 2 absolute consummate professionals and 2 of the fastest drivers that have ever sat in a Formula One car, head-to-head. The outcome of the 2021 season, while it is one that I feel is good for the sport, it is not one that was gotten in a legitimate manner or a respectable manner. The tragedy of this situation is that it is not the fault either of Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen that race control decided to take the actions that it took today. But the tragedy of the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and the 2021 Formula One World Championship is that Formula One, on its own accord, on its own volition, and via its own actions, severely damaged and severely discredited the integrity of the sport that is Formula One racing. Inconsistencies in assessments of penalties, in investigations of on-track incidents, have plagued Formula One for decades, truly. But in particular, they have been brought to the forefront in 2021. We had irregularities in Azerbaijan concerning the uses of rear tires. We had irregularities in Brazil more recently concerning Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton with Verstappen doing a very, very hard job of defending a corner. And today we had inconsistencies in the assessment of potential penalties against Lewis Hamilton for an overzealous escape maneuver in turn 6 on lap 1, ultimately resulting in Hamilton maintaining a lasting advantage, which he enjoyed for the duration of the Grand Prix, barring the final lap during the safety car restart. A ruling from race control, as we have learned today, is not the final word. It is evidently possible for team principals to go onto the FIA radio loop and pressure the race director to make decisions that would be more favorable to their particular championship aspirations. It's now possible for team principals to lobby against the deployment of safety cars. In the case of Antonio Giovinazzi apparently losing his brakes, and Toto Wolff calling up Michael Masi and saying, please do not put out a safety car, despite Giovinazzi's car not being in an immediately recoverable position and being entirely exposed immediately off the firing line to cars approaching a corner at over 100 miles an hour, putting marshals at risk undoubtedly. The world of bullying, intimidation, and politicking has overcome the world of sport as far as Formula One is concerned. Toto Wolff and Christian Horner have both used this to their advantage at various points throughout the 2021 championship. Perhaps more effective in its use has been Toto Wolff. It certainly helps that Mercedes have won every championship since 2014, and undoubtedly they bring the most money into the sport, perhaps only second to Ferrari. However, the safety car, the medical car, other support vehicles are provided by Mercedes-Benz, at least in part. And we all know what the more valuable brand to a racing series is. The world's oldest car company, the ones who legitimately have the claim of inventing the automobile as we know it, or an energy drinks company. We know what the answer is. Ultimately, the pity of the situation is that this will overshadow the wonderful achievements that have been gotten by both Mercedes-AMG Petronas in winning their 8th consecutive Constructors' Championship, a feat that no one has ever done before, and that, unless Mercedes themselves win a 9th title in 2022, no one will do again. And of course, the inaugural World Championship for Max Verstappen, the first and only Dutch World Champion, the first Red Bull champion since Sebastian Vettel in 2013, and the first non-Mercedes driver to unseat the World Championship from the grasp of Mercedes since 2014. Just as Fernando Alonso beat Michael Schumacher in 2005, ending the Germans' run of 5 straight drivers' titles, to date a record, Max Verstappen's win should be regarded in a similar light. A changing of the guard. An optimistic look toward the future. Something to look forward to in the years to come. As one great driver is nearing the end of his career, and another has stepped up to take his place. Such is life, and such is motorsport. However, that's not what we are thinking about today. We're thinking about how the FIA abandons its own rulebook, contrives new rules in the moment, and then enforces them as if they're gospel. I have no doubt that there will be further proceedings, both with the FIA and Mercedes directly, in the World Motorsport Council, and in civil courts regarding the events of the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. But there is one thing that I do know for certain today. It's that Formula One has forever sullied its reputation. That it is no longer a sporting contest between some of the smartest designers in the automotive industry and some of the bravest and most competent, consummately complete athletes in the world. It is now truly a game of politics and grandstanding, of intimidation and bullying. When a team with the history and prestige of Mercedes is able to call the FIA and say, do this, and the FIA does it, we're not talking about a prestigious enterprise anymore. We're talking about a team resting on its laurels and using its influence to effect change in a championship. And when the FIA complies, we're not talking about an objective, unbiased sporting body that is there for the benefit of all competitors and all stakeholders. We're talking about a timid organization that is liable to fall afoul of slander and intimidation. Such is the state of the FIA Formula One World Championship today, the day of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, this December 12th, 2021. Congratulations to Max Verstappen. In my opinion, he is a very worthy world champion. Congratulations to Mercedes for their 8th Constructors' title. I just wish that we could focus on those two great achievements rather than the dire deficiencies in the arena in which they occurred. This has been my Sunday Drive. Until next time, I do thank you very much for watching. Ferrari Man 601 saying thanks, and of course, we will see you soon.